千世矣，500年矣，礼崩乐坏，周作一终。天下诸侯各据一方，征伐兼并，列国君主变法求强，以尽雄图。王道霸道，诸子百家，侧室贤臣，纵横捭阖，各展才略。乱生于世，弱生于强。万圣之国，以兴攻伐，横扫六合。华夏纷乱已久，大争之势，主怒者谁
？So, here is the brief introduction of the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. In the 549 years between the falling of Western Zhou and the rise of the Qin dynasty, many lords and princes emerged. The vassal states are so close to each other that the slightest misstep can be the source of sustenance for others. In these times of power struggle, the academic world was rich in talent. During this period, the achievements of the 100 schools of thought and scholarship of ancient Greek philosophy reflecting each other in glory. Great thinkers and philosophers emerged. This has led to an unprecedented rise in thought and philosophy. The Confucian school of thought, represented by Confucius, is the best known of these. But today we are going to talk about the relatively unknown Mozi and his school of Mohism.
Around the end of the Spring and Autumn period and the beginning of the Warring States period, about 470 years BC, our protagonist Mozi was born in an ordinary family in what is now called Tengzhou. During his teen years, Mozi served as a shepherd boy and a carpenter. In fact, according to the writings of Master Han Fei, Mozi designed the first Mu Yuan, the predecessor of modern kites. His experience as a member of the lower artisan class explains partly why Mozi later rebelled against the dominant Confucius school of thoughts he studied as a youth. Mozi rebuked that Confucianism placed an overemphasis on burdensome rituals, elaborate ceremonies, and costly funerals, all of which were detrimental to the livelihood of commoners as they added on to the text's responsibilities. With a universal love for all that suffered, eventually, Mozi decided to travel across the ravaged plains to spread his thoughts and dissuade rulers from their conquest plans. Noteworthily, Mozi is not only a philosopher, but also a politician, diplomat, educator, military strategist, mathematician, and scientist. About 2,000 years before the alleged apple fell upon Newton, Mozi had discovered that external force is the cause for motion and concluded that the cessation of motion is due to the opposing force. If there is no opposing force, the motion will never stop. Well, I don't really know how to feel for Aristotle, who came up with the wrong conclusion on motion of force 100 years later. But let's get back on track. Mainly discussed as a philosopher today, Mozi searched for objective standards of the world, which he termed fa. The most essential part of his philosophy is mohist epistemology. According to Mozi, knowledge comes from hearsay, deduction, and personal experience. Mozi further divided 3 stages to gaining knowledge from personal experience. 虑, 接, 明. 虑 refers to the beginning of one's thinking process. This is a stage where curiosity occurs and one starts to wonder about the outside world. 接 refers to exploring with one's 5 senses, using one's sensory organs to capture the object's form and physical properties. 明 is the final stage of synthesizing received information. It involves information organization, analysis, and final deduction. Mozi also proposed 3 principles, or fa as they termed it, for identifying the authenticity of statements. He believed that statements must have a root, source, and a use. The root refers to historical evidence and precedents. The source refers to empirical basis, what people see and hear. The use refers to when adopted as basis for government administration, the statement must provide some kind of benefit to the people. Although certain ambiguity among these 3 principles must be acknowledged, mohist epistemology provides an utilitarian resort to solve normative and descriptive questions. For instance, encountering Confucius' idea of fatalism, Mozi argued that Firstly, historical accounts prove that security and order originates from good government policy instead of fate. Secondly, no one had actually seen or heard directly about fate. Thirdly, fatalism has devastating effects on society as it renders people hopeless. Even in modern context, Mohist philosophy stands true and applicable.
In modern times where fake news spread at ever so fast rate through the internet, misinformation can have significant negative effect on national relationships and public opinion. When misinformation is disseminated, citizens may become skeptical of other official statements, making it even harder to maintain trust between the institution and its people. Division and hostility are intensified. And here is an example.
Scott and his team analysed the content, origin and reach of 225 pieces of fake news.
About 60% of the content involved recontextualizing, reworking, or reframing, a grain of truth or a true fact in a way that it was no longer true.
For instance, one video claimed to show crows in the centre of Wuhan at the height of the pandemic, with text implying they were attracted by dead bodies.
In fact, this video was from another city in China, 1,000 miles away. While it did show crows, those crows being right in this city had nothing to do with the pandemic at all.
Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, false information and conspiracy theory about vaccination spread rapidly on social media platforms.
Even President Trump has touted false and, in some cases, dangerous treatment ideas. Most recently, internal use of ultraviolet light and disinfectant.
I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning?
During a time when public health largely depended on reliable information, false narratives and distorted facts fueled fear, confusion, and hostility between nations. It is sufficient to say that misinformation significantly affected public trust in health authorities, hindered international cooperation in sharing accurate data and scientific research, and even lead to diplomatic tension and blame games regarding the origins and handling of virus.
Living in the post-truth era, we have now a lot to learn from Mohist philosophy and critical thinking ability. Applying Mohist 3 steps of gaining knowledge from personal experience to examine the authenticity of a piece of information, one must first be curious and starts questioning whether it is true, then check existing empirical evidence and sources, and in the end, make one's own judgment based on thorough synthesis of information. When baffled with the authenticity of a piece of news, why don't we try to think in Mohist philosophy? First, we remain curious and open-minded about the news story. Then, with existing scientific research and empirical evidence, we examine if the story checks the box. At last, a judgment on the authenticity of news is made independently through information synthesis and reasonable deduction. Essentially, even when we reach a conclusion, it is important to remain open-minded to new evidence and information. In the end, there is a quote from Mozi for all of us today. 赠特之言无入之耳，批判之声无出之口。